Hello, everyone, and welcome. Let's get all the YouTube stuff out of the way. If you enjoy this kind of content, please like and subscribe. It helps me a ton. But let's hop in. We've got patch 19, HotFix 19, and it brings with it just a tremendous number of changes. I'd like to give a shout out to Roly Poly Ollie. In the comments section of one of our videos, we've had a very in-depth discussion discussing specifically what to do with the buff ball comp. And a lot of his comments were like spot on with regard to what the developers pulled the trigger on yesterday. But yeah, we've been waiting for this for a while. The meta's gotten pretty stale. Buffball is yesterday's news, and let's just kind of hop in. The first thing to talk about is that they've got a lizard man race. That's right. While it looks like a snake in a trench coat, we have lizard men in the game now, and it's their first experimentation with non-humanoid hitboxes. The head is a little oddly shaped. I think it's got a larger surface area for a lot of downward swings, which should be really interesting to fight against. Fought a couple last night. They died pretty easy, but you know, your results may vary. The racial is that they get additional armor for their leathery skin, but they cannot wear helmets. And you know, 15, 20 armor. I mean, that's a pretty good armor buff for I guess some of the softer classes, but missing out on all the stats that can be on helmets, particularly when the helmets have been improved considerably. Like, I don't know. We'll see. But let's hop into the more substantive changes. The loot has been improved. Normal dungeons, normal goblin caves, runes, and crypts have slightly better loot, with the exception of treasure chests and sub-bosses where their loot has gotten considerably better. Royal coffins are once again worth looting. Stone tombs have been slightly improved with regard to their drop tables, but mostly we're talking about the big chests. The big chests have gotten decent again. They will have multiple blues in them in normal, and they have a really good shot at dropping epics. I think we got 2 epics out of one of them in this video. So yeah, loot rate in normals has been improved, but honestly, let's just talk about where the loot is real quick. Like, high roller is where it's at. If you got fear about running high roller, you shouldn't be worried. Hell is empty and all the devils are here. Like, all the people who should be in high roller continue just to run normals to farm non-high roller players. I don't know why that is. It's such a beta behavior. But regardless, you will encounter less gear obstacles in PvP fights, honestly, in high roller than you will in normals. That remains consistent last night and today, so get your butts to high roller, even if you got a rat. It is a little bit more difficult, but the reward is just so much better. All right, a huge change here. Clarity pots are no longer dropping in the game. If you had a bunch, hold on to them or sell them now because they no longer drop in the game as part of the attempts by Iron Mace to kind of slow down the buff ball comp. They've completely shaken up how you get your spells back, and to that end, clarity pots are gone. Okay, so they've walked back some of the weapon changes, and we need to talk about, you know, what's going on with that. So previous to several 3 patches ago, weapons scaled dramatically with rarity. So like a white was considerably worse than an epic, right? And then they tightened up that spread so that the base damage difference on rarity of a lot of different items came really close together. And they have kind of relaxed that quite a bit. They've relaxed that specifically for daggers and for swords and for bows and for polearms. They specifically did not do that for crossbows, throwable weapons, and magical weapons, that being like caster focuses, the magic staff, the crystal sword, etc. And I think that's a good change because, you know, in the post plus weapon damage paradigm, when all the weapon damage got taken off the gear, several of the classes, Rogue and Ranger in particular, took it, you know, the hardest, and they were kind of in a weak spot. So the increasing of damage to the base weapons for specifically those guys, daggers, swords, and polearms, I think was needed to kind of bring, you know, them back into the game a little bit. The wormhole damage has been reduced and armor penetration has been reduced. This is the first of several highly targeted barbarian slash buff ball changes that I think are really positive. On the upswing, though, the Battle Axe, Viking Sword, and Chris Dagger have all received new animation updates. These weapons were largely unusable with the Battle Axe and the Chris Dagger in particular. Hopefully they've improved the animations, the attack combo sequences, so that they're usable now. but we will see. I'll let you know after I've had a chance to play with them. The battle axe was just terrible. Viking sword you kind of got used to, but it often like bumped into door jams and the ceiling when attempting to swing it. So hopefully they've brought it down a little bit so that's not constantly happening. I swear it feels as long as a pole arm when you're doing a lot of those overhead swings sometimes. They made a change to the buckler. It's better at blocking now. I don't think that's really a material change because unless you can only use bucklers like bards, most people aren't rocking the buckler. It's a bad shield. So let's talk about base stat changes for bard stuff. So the lute instrument now gives knowledge as a primary stat. I think that's fantastic. The flute now gives agility as a primary stat. I think that's fantastic. The lyre now gives resourcefulness. I think that's great. They can only gain those attribute bonuses when the weapon is out. Like, so when they have the loot out, then they gain knowledge. But that actually allows them to kind of massage their builds a little bit and put, higher knowledge requirement spells kind of at the end of their spell priority. So they only need the knowledge from the loot to cast loot spells, which I think is a really interesting change. I think it's good. So more targeted nerfs on Puffball. The Northern Full Tunic, which is the Barbarian armor, chest armor of choice, armor rating reduced. The Padded Tunic armor, rating reduced and movement speed penalty increased. Same thing with Regal Gamison. All of the Barbarian helms armor base rating has been reduced. The Germandibu, the Barbuda, and the Viking Helm all have had a reduction in PDR, basically. And then some fighter love incoming, like the Armet, which is a fighter-only helm, gives strength as a base stat on the baseline instead of resourcefulness. Another great change. Warder's outfit now give agility instead of armor. Great change. Wanderer's outfit. The doublet gives agility instead of knowledge. Another great change. The Occultist Hood now gives magical healing instead of magic resist. A great change. The Wizard Hat and the Wizard Shoes now give magical power instead of magic resist. It's a great change. So everybody's getting a little bit more utility for their specs there. And, the Wizard Hat, the Wizard Shoes, and the Occultist Hood were almost never used in lieu of either the Shadow Mask or, better, more mage-specific stuff. And that's really good. The Wizard Hat and Shoes in particular, rolling with magical power, is really strong because the hat slot is one of the ones that can roll like true magic damage. So Wizard Hats, I think we're going to see a lot of pointy-hatted wizards out there from now on. And with regard to some of the least desirable stats that can roll on equipment, their roll range has been increased. So I'll pick on minimum action speed. Like action speed is a stat that most people will consider to be a dead stat. It was rolling as a base increment of 0.1%, and now that has been raised to 0.5%. So when you have a dead stat, the dead stat will actually be doing more, I guess, than it was before. This has been true of a bunch of different stats, which may or may not be considered dead stats to some of you, but action speed, armor rating, move speed, cast speed, and buff duration, regular interaction speed, and magical interaction speed all had like significant increases in their roll ranges. So you're going to now see some like buff duration plus 10% kind of rolls on epics, which is, I don't know, it's starting to get to an area where you actually might consider it a positive instead of a dead stat. In particular, like move speed, we're going to come back to that in a second, and base armor as a plus armor add. Getting an adjustment that will have like interesting impacts at the high end, I think. Okay, so let's get into the specifics around class stuff. Like the stated intent of this patch was to kind of reduce the prevalence, dominance, or belligerence of Buffball, and I think they approached it pretty wisely and made some interesting changes. So, taking Clarity Pots out of the game slows the game down. It forces recovery. It forces you to sit. And let's talk about sitting because they made a significant change to it. They have essentially doubled. They've increased the rate of return on spell slots while sitting by about 130%. The recharge interval went from 3 seconds to 2 seconds, so it ticks faster. And the amount of spell cost regained from sitting went from 18 per tick to 17 per tick. So it's like 130% increase. It's really strong, and it feels good. As you can see from this clip, I'm running Cleric in the background here. I'm supporting this rat team as we run around. And honestly, the spell recharge rate, even without the Bard Song of Clarity, which we'll talk about in a second, felt really good. I can cast 2 protections, 2 bubbles on my team, sit down, and before those bubbles wear off, I will have both of those bubbles back. So prevention is definitely worth a pound of cure at this point. Yeah, more on that in a second. Fighters got some love. You know, fighters have been put on the back burner for a while now because of the dominance of Barbarian in the buffball meta. Here's an interesting change I've only begun to play with, but Adrenaline Spike, which was a perk that was not taken, had its activation threshold changed from 15% health to 40% health, meaning that it automatically activates when the fighter used to drop below 15% health, which, when that happens, you normally died. Having that change to the threshold to 40%, going to 40% health in teamfights happens a ton. So that's a lot of value there. It's going to be really interesting to see if this becomes a must-have perk, because 2 other changes were made to it as well. The duration of the buff from Adrenaline Spike activating got changed from 8 seconds to 12 seconds, and Adrenaline Rush's debuff got changed from 4 seconds to 2 seconds. I don't think that's really significant. A change was made to the fighter's taunt ability. It grants an additional 10% magical damage reduction. I don't think that's going to push it into relevancy. I think taunt's still going to be left out of the meta completely. Barbarian's Carnage ability got changed. It's giving armor rating now instead of strength. I think that's okay. They're trying to make sure Barb doesn't fall completely out of relevancy, and I like some of the changes they're making here. Axe Specialization now increases weapon damage by 3 instead of 10% physical damage bonus. I think that's a net positive. Achilles Strike. The debuff duration changed from 2 seconds to 4 seconds. Maybe it's actually usable now. At 2 seconds, basically you would land it and it would be gone before you could even close the distance to get a swing in. So it didn't really have the utility that I think the devs were shooting for with that ability. It got really nerfed into the ground after it, you know, I don't know. It was really, really tough to play around before. I think this is going to be huge. So Barbarian's life blood exchange has been significantly changed. It has gone from a 6-second buff to an 8-second buff, and the lifesteal amount has been increased from 5% to 15%. I basically think that means that, you know, Barbarians who are attacking you with this ability and high attack speed are going to be healing a significant amount in combat. Something like, I don't know, up to 30 hit points every 1 second, every 1.5 seconds, somewhere in there. That's a lot of healing. Like, we'll see how that pans out. That may be too strong, honestly. They changed Barbarian's Life Siphon. Renamed it to War Sacrifice. It still costs too much health and doesn't do enough, giving you 5 attributes. That's not going to come back in. Some quality of life stuff for rogues. So the hand crossbow mastery perk, which allows the rogue to equip hand crossbows in the first place, now does an additional base 2 weapon damage. I think that's an okay change, particularly for like the poison builds that you see the rogues running now with plus magical damage, using hand crossbows to proc it at range at relative safety. Double jump was changed completely, so you no longer get a debuff upon landing that reduces your movement speed, but instead, simply taking the perk reduces your movement speed penalty. It applies a movement speed penalty of 20, which is like a 7% slow. And so I think that's something that the rogues are now going to have to build around. I think they were already prioritizing movement speed, you know, as maybe their first or second stat on a lot of gear. And I don't think that's going to change. Hopefully the increase in movement speed range that things can roll with, it went from 1 to 2. That's going to be able to allow them to close the gap, because right now movement speed is really all they have, I think, by and large. I mean, they did get a buff. Rogues did get a buff, you know, indirectly by the changes to swords and daggers. I think that we are going to see their damage go up, but like mobility is still king, I think. Okay, a couple ranger changes. Ranger's ranged weapon mastery perk physical damage bonus increased from 5% to 10%. That's an okay change. We'll really have to wait and see whether or not that's too little or too much based on the ranges that the longbows are rolling and the recurve bows are rolling now at higher rarities. That could be anywhere from like 3 to 7 additional like on hit damage. So I don't know. We're just gonna have to see. They're gonna clearly try to walk the damage back to where they feel like it should be. It's obviously a little low right now. They made another change, which is kind of weird, to one of my least favorite skills in the game. Ranger has an ability called Crippling Shot. It's a perk, and it gives the passive ability that when you shoot a target in their legs, it applies a movement speed debuff. It used to be 15%. They've changed it to 25%. It still lasts for like a second and a half. So it's not that considerable. The thing that's kind of perverse about this skill is that, you know, it wants to make the Ranger shoot enemy players in a sour spot, right? Like legs is already reduced damage. So, you know, I guess they're trying to, you know, put the Ranger in a little bit more of a CC role here to be able to dramatically slow incoming opponents. I don't think the duration is long enough for anyone to take this. I still don't think they'll be running it. I won't be running it on my Ranger. Okay, so we're going to get into a whole bunch of cleric changes. This is kind of the first cleric nerf that we've seen since, I don't know, early access alpha test 2 or something. But yeah, so clerics no longer start with the magic branch. Their spellcasting focus is now a spellbook, which is fantastic. It's a junk level spellbook, but you get to start with a spellbook and actually like be a character instead of trying to wave that twig around, which is a great change. All cleric healing got nerfed. The lesser heal, the small heal, your charges went from 4 to 3. Casting time increased from 1 second to 1.25 seconds. That still feels okay. I played a lot of it in this video you're watching right now. It still feels okay. Holy Strike now has a half-second delay before the bolt actually strikes the ground, very similar to Lightning Strike from the Mage. I think it's a good change. Alright, the big heal got nerfed. Holy Light, and it went from, you know, you having 4 charges of it to 3. That's okay. The casting speed getting changed from 2 seconds to 2.5 seconds is a big deal. The heal got changed from 30 base to 25 base, less of a big deal. This feels completely different to use in combat. I missed several of them due to, you know, ending the cast early because I just have the muscle memory for the 2-second cast opposed to the 2.5-second cast. This is going to take some getting used to. Basically, they're saying we want less healing in combat, particularly the big heal in combat. Earthquake got changed from 2 charges to 1 charge. Not a huge deal. Laughably, Locust Swarm got changed from 2 charges to 1 charge. Nobody uses that spell. It's terrible. And more targeted buff ball nerfs. The Wizard Haste no longer grants movement speed. So no more hasting the Barbarian and sending them in for a silent, invisible engage. Instead, it improves casting speed instead of movement speed, which I think is going to be a huge DPS buff for Wizards. But we'll see how that works out. Invisibility now leaves an after image every 1.5 seconds. So if somebody's got a long duration invis and they're running in on you, you're going to be able to see sparklies around where they are at any given time. This is going to reduce the effectiveness of invised, hasted barbarians showing up in the middle of your team and killing everybody before you even know they're there. We got a bunch of bard changes, which I am reading really kind of as a buff, or at worst kind of a break even. Their base strength got reduced by 1, their will got increased by 1. Their encore skill now plays the next song at maximum play speed. Let's see if that'll bring that back into relevancy. Shriek of Weakness and Song of Silence both got changed to have a static 300 range across all levels of play. So I think what people are sleeping on here is that they can play that song really poorly, and it's just as effective as if they play it really well. So they can do both Silence and Weakness as super quick casts, and you know, as long as they're within 300 range, which is about the size of a Pika from a cleric. It's not small. You know, then they'll get that off. Additionally, the Song of Silence is now enemy players only, so that can be spammed essentially on an enemy team of casters, and as long as they're too close to the bard, they won't be able to do anything. The biggest change to bard, and this is probably making them essential in certain groups, is that their Coral of Clarity has been vastly improved. Their tick is now once every 2 seconds, just like sitting. The amount has changed from 8 to 17. So we're talking about like a 260% improvement to regen. When you have a bard song on you, your spells come back lightning fast. Sanctuary, which is a spell that I enjoy on the cleric in PvE, it now comes back while sitting with that bard buff on. It comes back lightning fast.
Cool, appreciate it.
All right, so we're running out of time here just to talk about a couple things which I don't really know how they're going to play out. I haven't had a chance to play with them, but like this may be kind of big. Warlock's Torture Mastery now doubles the cost of spells, but in addition to that, the base cost of Warlock spells, which are paid in health, have been reduced. So that's a really interesting change. I'm not sure if the reduction offsets the additional, damage you're going to be taking from running Warlock's Torture Mastery, but they have added additional magical healing in the form of the Occultist Hood. So we'll just see how that all has to pan out. Generally speaking, I think they're going in the right direction. They're making, I think, Warlocks a little bit more viable at an ungeared state or a low gear state, where they're one of the most gear dependent classes like in the game. Until they stack up that magical healing, like they're not the PvE gods that they can be at the end. And they have nerfed all shrines into nothing. Shrines are basically dead. The move speed shrine, which was probably the most belligerent, went from 50 speed to 10 speed. The power shrine went from 30 to 15, and the PDR shrine went from 15 to 5. So, we're not really going to have to, camp the shrine areas in every map just to feel competitive. Anyway, great changes. Let's discuss them here. I think this is a really positive patch for everybody involved. But if you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe. Good luck to you in your raids to come, and thanks for watching.